Hello there. My name is Harish Shah, and I'm the guy whom they call the Singapore Futurist. And I'm recording this video on the 3rd of July of the year 2025 to talk about, moving forth from this point in time, the future of technological innovation and emerging technologies in very broad terms. And this is a very salient topic because the first quarter of the 21st century has by and large been defined by emerging technologies and disruptions. So, there are a few terms that I want to introduce you to that I have coined myself. The first being dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem. Second, I want to introduce you to this term also coined by myself, organic modular spiraling growth. So let me repeat that. Dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem, in short, DTTE, and organic modular spiraling growth, OMSG. Now, both of these terms are interconnected and interrelated. And let me start with DTTE, dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem. As a futurologist, it's something routinely said by me that nothing ever happens in a silo, nothing ever happens in a single vertical. No development, no evolution, no progress, no innovation happens as a standalone where everything else is static, non-moving. That doesn't happen. Nothing ever happens in a linear fashion, right? As one technology develops, a lot of other technologies are developing at the same time at differing paces on differing scales. That at some point will all have to either collide or converge, where at some point some of these developing technologies will either render some other technologies that are also developing obsolete, or will enhance or augment them or complement them. So this is what we call a technological landscape, or you can also call it an ecosystem, something like a biosphere in the natural world. And we have reached a particular threshold in the technological ecosystem that it's not just changing, it's not just progressing or advancing, it's not just evolving anymore. In fact, it's terraforming to take on a whole new form and whole new shape. And that terraforming process is not something that's a one off or a single event. It's not a temporary phase, but it's something that's going to be perpetual and something that's going to be a constant where you will see and you will find the technological ecosystem being something that's terraforming continuously, perpetually, constantly, all the time as a norm, a standard routine norm. An anomaly or a disruption would be that terraforming not happening or pausing to the technological ecosystem that pervades the globe, that pervades all of human civilization right now as of the year 2025. And that terraforming process is happening dynamically. It's not happening in a planned, linear manner. It's something that's not within the control, as much as a lot of people may hate the idea of that. That terraforming process is not within the control of a select few or a handful of people, not even the most powerful people in the tech world or the business world or in government somewhere, or it's not even in the control of a few governments put together. This terraforming process that has begun sometime closer to the start of the 2020s, probably sort of slowed down or delayed initially at the start by the COVID-19 event. This terraforming process is something that's got seemingly a life of its own. It's happening dynamically and pretty organically as well as innovators, uh, the post digital generation, post digital graduates, technologists, inventors, they are coming up with new things all the time, raced against each other, whether consciously, subconsciously, or unconsciously, in terms of, okay, one-upsmanship, right? Who can outdo the other in something smarter, in something more efficient, in something that's not been done before, right? Or something that's been stuck at the conceptual or theoretical or hypothetical stage or fantasy stage for too long and not been brought to life. And that is why the past 25 years, the first quarter of the 21st century, as I started this video with, has been largely defined by emerging technologies and disruptions, which is something that's now a norm, a constant norm, and a perpetual norm that, as far as is foreseeable ahead into the future, tangibly, empirically, that's how it's going to remain. Emerging technologies and disruptions as a routine constant, perpetual constant, right? So, because of that, we are entering this phase, this stage, this human chapter where dynamically a terraforming process is perpetually going to be in the works all the time without an end. It's not a cyclical process, it's just going to keep happening to the technological ecosystem. But even though I say this is not a cyclic process. It doesn't happen in cycles where it completes a loop and then it stops for a while or ends for a while. While this terraforming process is not temporary, is perpetual, it's going to be in a shape of a sphere or a circle where there will be technologies on the outside perimeter of the ecosystem, and there will be technologies right at the center, at the core, and then there'll be technologies all over in any number of layers between that core and that outer parameter. And what's going to happen to this dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem as a constant, as a perpetual constant moving forward from this first quarter of the 21st century is what I call OMSG, organic, modular, spiraling growth. This technological ecosystem of ours being the human race, the dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem, is going to continue to grow. But it's not going to be a growth where it just spirals outwards. The way it's going to happen is new technologies, new emerging technologies will latch onto or couple with or ride on existing technologies that are already diffused and mass commercialized, whether to the consumer market or to the business market, just the B2B market. And they will ride initially, they'll start riding initially on the surface, the parameter surface, going around in a circle of the DTTE, dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem. And as they grow in relevance or grow in importance, then this process of organic modular spiraling growth will take place where the ecosystem will grow outwards through a spiraling action of those increasingly relevant, increasingly important, is increasingly useful new emerging technologies making their way in a spiral through the layers, down through the layers, cutting across the layers gradually towards the very epicenter of the ecosystem, towards the core, and perhaps displace some, one or two or more of the key core technologies right at that epicenter, at the core of that technological ecosystem. If they grow in importance and relevance enough without being disrupted or rendered obsolete before that. Now, what happens if a new technology, a new emerging technology, fails to establish or entrench itself for its usefulness, for its usage, for its adoption, take up, whatever you want to call it, in the marketplace, in the world? It will not last on the parameter of the DTTE, the dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem. It will just fall away and become history or be just forgotten and never see its place in history books. Whereas the technologies that do grow, they'll make their way towards the center, towards core. And this will not be without displacement. And this is something that's not exactly entirely new because something along these lines have always been happening throughout much of human history, but not just to the size, scale, the rapidity, the pace, the frequency, and in the dynamic fashion that it's going to be happening ahead, as it's already started to happen somewhat as of the time at which I'm recording this video. And this all has implications for the future of technological innovation and emerging technologies, which is why I'm telling you all these things in this video. So what will happen also is that as some technologies lose their relevance, no matter how close they are to the center of the tech ecosystem, the tech landscape, right, at the heart of it, or even if they are at the very center of the core, right, primarily around which everything else revolves. If those technologies mature and age in such a fashion that perhaps they're no longer needed because there are other technologies that fulfill their functions independently of them, then those technologies will start to move outwards. So why do I call this process dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem? Why do I call the new tech landscape that? It's a very simple reason that nothing is going to be static anymore. Everything is going to be constantly moving. There'll be technologies moving from the outside of the parameter towards the core, and there'll be technologies at the core or close to the core, they'll be moving outwards, and everything in between will be moving, either outwards or inwards all the time, at all times, constantly. Nothing is going to remain in its place, in its importance, right? Constantly. You're either moving closer to the core or moving outwards in terms of whatever that individual technology or form of technology is, right? So that's what is going to happen. The ecosystem will keep growing, it will not shrink. That's why I call it organic, modular, spiraling growth. But whether technologies will remain and for how long they remain within that technological ecosystem, the dynamics of that are going to be very different from whatever they've been in the past, before 2025, after 2025. So this becomes a very challenging situation for technological innovators. This becomes a very challenging situation for inventors. And everything I've told you in this video comes from the perspective and comes through the lenses of a business mind, of a business trained mind, not as an inventor, not as an innovator, not as a technologist, not as an engineer. It comes from a business mind because this is what the world of business and human society will look like in terms of the usage, the adoption, and the life cycle of technologies in the general tech landscape, right? Which is now the DTTE, something, a concept, a notion, an idea that is going to be relevant for as far as is foreseeable empirically as of today into the future, where your tech landscape is, again, I reiterate, I know I'm being repetitive, but it's necessary to drive home this point, the dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem. It's an ecosystem that decides and determines what new emerging technologies will be relevant and will matter and will see the light of day in terms of usage, adoption, take up, in terms of purchase by any type of a user, be it a consumer, general consumer user, right? A general member of public, a general individual, or a corporation, a company, or a government. It's the ecosystem, an independent ecosystem that's neutral of any one party's influence that will determine what emerging technologies will be relevant and will be able to latch on to the parameter to begin its life outside of the lab or the workshop in the first place, right? And it is also this ecosystem, this dynamically terraforming technological ecosystem, that will determine what technologies, even if they're right at the core for a particular period of time, even if they are the heart of everything, right? Whether those technologies will continue to have a place in the next form that the whole ecosystem terraforms into. That actually is something to let yourself sink in your thought when it comes to this idea of disruption. So we talked so much about disruption in the first quarter of the 21st century. Now, based on what I just told you, imagine what disruption is going to be like ahead after 2025. Now, that said, you need to then ask yourself or talk to a professional futurist who knows a little about this subject, a bit perhaps with greater research, analysis, and insight, what it means for your tech innovation efforts and investments, and what you need to do with the emerging technologies that perhaps you're already working on to make sure that they have some longevity ahead. Have a good day.